What can you tell us about your folk music career in Chicago before you were adopted by the filk community?
Good question. When I moved out to Chicago, there was still a pretty good folk scene there. I assembled my little band. I had joined the Wobblies by then. I had my 3 Wobbly buddies, Mary Froman, Robin Oya, Kathy Taylor. Mary's dead now, but the rest are still alive, scattered. Carol Mason. We formed the Wobbly Band. We were the band of the Chicago branch of the IWW. And we sang for picket lines and for strikes and for strike fundraisers. When there was no strikes going on, we'd hit up the coffee houses and any other place where we could talk people into paying us to sing, or at least letting us pass the hat for tips. I remember this one bar we sang at. Bars have different cultures. We all know what a gay bar is like and how that differs from a fern bar or a sports bar. Well, we later found out the place we were singing was the town fight bar. The stage was screened off with chain link and protected the performers from getting bottles thrown at them. I remember we were playing one set there. A brawl broke out while we were singing. It has nothing to do with us. The brawl started way at the other end of the bar and sort of worked its way up. We kept on playing and singing while the fight went past us and the beer bottles flew, and we wound out what that chain link screening was for. Didn't stop us. We didn't miss a beat. Kept on playing, kept on singing. And when the fight finally died down, we were still playing and singing. The survivors, the ones who were conscious, bought us around to drinks for being such good sports just to keep on playing. But before I got to Chicago, I discovered Star Trek in reruns and began writing, the 1,000th man, I began writing Star Trek songs. Couldn't squeeze them into our folk sessions because even though Star Trek was wildly popular, most people were not into songs about science fiction themes. But I also rediscovered science fiction conventions. I went to my first one by way of a comic book. One of the bigger comic books put out by Warren Publishing, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella, and Famous Monsters of Filmland. I think I won some sort of contest and got invited by the editors to a science fiction convention in Philadelphia. I was eager to go. Of course, my mom would not let me go alone. I was 16, so she came along with.
Oh, your poor mother.
Yeah, and I went to all the panels, and I couldn't get to the parties because they were serving booze. Mom went to those.
Your mom wasn't that much of a fuddy-duddy after all.
No. Especially if there were editors that she could talk to. But I discovered there were science fiction conventions. And when I got to Chicago, I took up with them again. And the first big commercial science fiction convention, a Star Trek convention, was held in Chicago. And by then, I and my little band had enough Star Trek songs for a full set, which later became the set we did on our first album, Folk Songs for Folks Who Ain't Even Been Yet. Later incorporated into Folk Songs for Soldier Sailors, and part of them incorporated into Skybound. But anyway, there was this commercial big Star Trek convention being held in Chicago, and didn't have much money, par for the course. So I called up the directors and asked, I have a whole bunch of Star Trek songs. If I play them at your convention, can I get a free membership? And she said, oh, we'll not only let you in free, we'll pay you. And I announced that fact to my union local. And they saw to it, they had a fellow come down there and make sure of exactly what I was going to get paid and how much and I should get in advance and so on. And so I got to sing a whole concert. But better than that, I got to get up on the top floor of the convention hotel where all the pros were hanging out. And I got to meet Harlan Ellison. I played a trick on him. We were up there sitting in the hallways talking. I was talking to Phil Jose Farmer, whose work I'd admired for years. Hello, I'm so pleased to meet you. And I got to talking about his novel Flesh, which borrows heavily from Robert Graves's Pagan Folk Customs. But still, this is Phil Jose Farmer, the guy who wrote the first modern science fiction that has real sex in it. So he was considered a terribly daring writer. I'm sitting there in the hallway talking to Phil Jose Farmer when Harlan Ellison comes trotting out of his hotel room wearing nothing but a towel. He was obviously trying to shock somebody. And I figured, what the hell? Here I am talking to Phil Jose Farmer, of all people. I'm not going to back down in front of him. So I reached out and I tweaked away the towel. Harlan spun around and ran back, twinkling, into his hotel room.
That's what he gets.
The next time I saw him, he was fully clothed and very polite. First discovering that, yes, There were other people who liked this kind of music. And by then I was old enough to go to at least some of the room parties. Depending on where you were, what state, it was legal for 18-year-olds to drink, so I could get into the parties. And went to the parties, heard the songs they already had, played along with, learned them. Ran into a guy named Filthy Pierre, who was rather famous. The Vietnam War was hot by then. And Filthy Pierre got that nickname at MIT because he wore this one shirt he never washed. And he said he would wear it and not launder it until the war was over. It was his way of motivating the students at MIT to resist the war. They came up with some rather ingenious tricks. MIT students, really. I heard of one of them that they had a peace march and the cops chased them, so they ran into this one building. They prepared in advance, big rotunda. The students ran in one side and out the other. Cops followed them, and this big stretched plastic that had been suspended on the balcony rails above way up in the rotunda suddenly dropped an awful lot of water onto the cops. Bloosh! Hit the cops, knocked them all down. All the students got away. Then, of course, they rolled up the tarpaulin and got it out of there. And here's all these wringing wet cops, slightly dazed, trying to explain to their chief how they let the peace marchers get away. The MIT students were brilliant at war resistance. Couldn't tell you half the things they did. But Filthy Pierre had at least that much of an influence. He assembled the first, I think, was collected by the club that puts on the Philadelphia Convention. I'm not sure, but Filthy Pierre did a collection called Microfilk. It was a home-printed, tall notebook.
People talk about them in awe still today.
Yeah. The print was so small.
You had to have a...
Yeah, that along with each book, he sold a rod-shaped magnifying bar. So you could run it down the page and see the words. So I got into filk, as I say, through the conventions, through mostly the parties. And I knew that things were changing. Oh, the filk, it is a-changing. When I was invited to a party in the early afternoon. In the afternoon? This is odd. They specifically wanted me. And bring my guitar. Oh, sure, we want you to sing. We want you to sing. Come on. This is a singing party. I walked into the hotel room and saw this guy setting up his microphone. It was a professional microphone on a boom with a professional mixing board, and I realized, okay, filk will become acceptable. It was not long after that I ran into Terry Lee at another Chicago convention. Hey, why don't you move out to California and come sing for us? We'll pay you. And I said, wait till I pack.
So, do you think that you're one of the pioneers then into filk?
I don't know if I was a pioneer. The real pioneers, I think, were Paul Anderson and Gordy Dixon. They started it, they set it up, they began it, and everybody else followed in. I was in the first wave, I think. I would say filk was the brainchild of Gordy Dixon, Paul Anderson, and Filthy Pierre.
So, before we go too far into the future from there, somebody wanted to know what your experiences with the Wobblies was like.
Amazing. The Wobblies are a very weird bunch of radicals. They were the result of a mad night of love in the turn of the last century, a mad night of love between the New York Jewish labor anarchists and a bunch of Southwestern cowboy socialists who were trying to organize for better wages. And the Wobblies were a weird bunch. And very early on, they learned the power of song. Joe Hill is a classic. I learned a lot about Joe Hill living in the Wobblies. One thing, we found out why Joel Hillstrom left Sweden. Apparently he'd gotten a girl in trouble and couldn't afford to marry her. We know because we ran into his son, who was a man in his 60s by then. He hadn't been that bad off. The mother's family took care of her. So he grew up without any problems. But later the word got back to him about what his father was doing in the New World. Joe Hill left a son in Sweden. And of course, as the union band, my little bunch of buddies, we were folk singers to begin with, and we got to the union, we became the union band, and we picked up an awful lot of old classic union songs. And I still think that Joe Hill's The Preacher and the Slave is his best. In fact, one of the best songs of the labor movement ever. Although I there was somebody who put a tune to slightly altered words from a Kipling poem that became the song, "We have fed you all for 1,000 years." That's still in the Little Red Songbook. I wrote a song for the Wobblies, "We're Still Here." That one has been recorded. We're still here, we're still here. 105 hard years and more, and we're still here. Gotta be 120 years now with Wobblies. We sang under all conditions, including singing for rallies and picket lines in the Chicago winter, which is... Well, Monster was one tough guitar to live through that, so was I. I mean, try singing for a picket line in a blowing Chicago blizzard.